So much of what I got told about trauma in my life was not true. And I remember a therapist saying to me back in my 30s, you know, see, people like you, they're really just trying to recreate their childhood. Well, between you and me, they could not have been more wrong. This myth still gets pushed on people who grew up with abuse and neglect. People who say that kind of thing, this is just what you want, you're trying to recreate the past so you can this time experience success. It's just, to me, it sounds crazy. I know they have good intentions, and they think they're shedding light on something that they believe that we just don't understand and we need to be told. It needs to be explained to us that, you know, we just actually want to be abandoned. Have you ever been told this? It must look like that from the outside, but I don't believe that's true. And as a person who lived through this myself with neglectful parents and later several relationships that left me abandoned and alone in a big way in my young adulthood, I'll tell you what I believe is really going on in that repetition pattern. When we keep repeating the pattern and getting into relationships and getting abandoned, of course we don't want to be abandoned. We want to be loved and safe and accepted just like anyone, and we deserve it. But to heal, we've got to get rid of the confusing and shaming idea that we're trying to get abandoned and focus on what the real problems are. Because when you can see the problem, you can take steps to heal it. You can heal this. You can learn to form relationships with good people who love you and are committed to you. So here's what I think is really going on. When you find yourself stuck in an abandonment loop, it's happening because, number one, abandonment happened to you before. That's the reason getting abandoned as a child has a way of dampening down your expectations. And at the same time, making you incredibly good at adapting to horrible circumstances at home. So you fit yourself to it. I call this crap fit. You fit yourself to crap because you got trained to do that when you were a kid. To do it so well, in fact, that when people treated you badly, you maybe even prided yourself on how tough you were. You know, hey, no problem. I'm a ninja at this. I can take anything. I'll solve it. But when you take that into adulthood, it can be a really terrible approach to evaluating people. You don't want to be good at fitting yourself to crap. You want to be bad at it. You want to have a really good red flag detector instead. That's like, oh, this is crap. I don't want to be here. And unfortunately, when CPTSD is untreated, it just feels normal to be treated badly. It feels normal that people are causing you to have to put up with horrible treatment. And if you didn't have that, if you would heal that crap fit, which you can do when you start healing that red flag detector, you can see people coming at you a mile off with this kind of thing, and you can avoid them. You are very clear that, hey, that's not a person who is sincerely interested in me or my well-being, or that's a person who may be interested, but they're not capable of making that kind of a commitment. So you start to have discernment to choose people who are safe for you to give your heart and invest your future in. And then you're not abandoned. Number two is you learn that you had to have a very nice personality, again, because of the circumstances of what you were growing up with. So you habitually show this very nice side of your personality to the world. You go into meeting people, but then because you have CPTSD, you have bursts of anger, and you might have emotional flashbacks. That's a thing that happens to people with CPTSD. If you haven't heard of it, it's kind of like an emotional flashback is sort of like a regular flashback, but it's emotional. It's often coming from a time before you had language. You might wake up in a bad mood and you don't even know why, but you just feel like everybody's against you, for example. And you may find yourself banging around the house, being critical, being impossible to please. And sometimes that's an emotional flashback. Well, that's not fun for partners to deal with. So the person they first fell for, that's you, was kind and supportive, but then they see you turn into someone angry and unreasonable. Have you had that happen where you lash out? That's frightening to healthy people. So if you've been in a relationship with someone who was emotionally healthy and could detect red flags, that may be the point at which they walked away and left you. And it's sad. It's a terrible loss, but Just stay with me here, because it's never too late to have another chance at life. And you can heal these emotional flashbacks and these behaviors. So some other unpleasant personality things that come along with CPTSD include being unreliable or unreasonable when you feel hurt or left out. And sometimes those feelings can get exaggerated for us because of emotional dysregulation. Or maybe because you know that you tend to overreact to things, you try to compensate by being very fake, walking on eggshells, right? Trying to act like everything's fine, I'm cool, no, it's not a problem. And to other people, that just feels like something's not right here, like you don't seem to have any boundaries. So that's a reason that people might be backing away from you. And this is all stuff that you can heal, but for right now, it might be pushing people away. All right, the fourth reason that abandonment might be following you in your life is that your self-esteem is so wounded that you feel embarrassed to actually feel and say what you want to in a relationship when you would like it to go to the next step, or to even admit that what you want is marriage. And it's this weird thing. When I coach people around relationships who have complex PTSD, I almost never meet anyone who can admit openly that they want the whole thing. They want to get married one day. And even among people who are very, very focused on trying to transform their ability to date and find real love. And at first I was just like, well, what's going on? Has there been some kind of cultural collapse that people don't actually want marriage anymore? And I know to some degree that has happened, but it's not very much. In reality, when I started asking more questions of people, it turned out that was everybody's heart's desire. Everybody I've coached has had the heart's desire to be married one day. And yet when I ask, what is your ideal relationship? They hedge their bet on that. And they say, oh, I want a life partner, or I want a long-term relationship. And so I ask more questions about that and say, so when you say long-term, do you mean like after 10 years or something and the whole thing ends, and that's kind of what you're looking for, or you're okay with it? And they're like, no, I want it to last like all my life. So I go, well, that's different than a long-term relationship. That's a marriage. And that's where you make a lifetime commitment. And that feels to a person who's been through a lot of hardship in relationships because of their trauma, it feels like an impossible dream. It feels like too much to ask that somebody would really always be there for them and share everything with them. And they feel like they can't ask for it. But the problem is that you compromise when you can't admit what you really want. You're kind of entering into the dating situation dishonestly for yourself and for the other person too. And it's a setup for you to feel really disappointed and hurt when things don't turn out the way you secretly hope they would, when it only turns out to be a long-term relationship. So I really encourage you to support your healing by writing down on paper what it is you really want, even though you know that we don't all get what we want. It's not like that, but it's good to know what you want. And even if you get what you want, it may not work out forever. Those are all givens in life. But can you admit what you really want and get that on paper? All right. The fifth reason that you might be a little bit in the danger zone for abandonment is that you may have been conditioned through therapy, for example, to focus excessively on your feelings, so that when things are hard or you're having some kind of conflict, it becomes all about you and not enough about the other person, or better yet, about the solutions that could make the situation better. It's easier said than done. Resolving problems, I know, it's an advanced skill. But when you can't do it, that is what is called processing death. You just talk and talk and talk. You process your feelings over and over, talking for hours, crying, till you're both feeling completely drained and ground down. And yet the communication and the solution doesn't go anywhere. And it has a way of killing the romance in a relationship if that happens too much. It has a way of just sucking the life out of the partners. What happens when we talk about traumatic experiences and feelings, and this is one reason why I teach people over and over again, if you're not getting anywhere in your healing, consider not talking so much about the trauma and instead using writing. You can write your fears and resentments. That's a technique I teach. It's called the Daily Practice. It's a free online course that's always available in the description section below my videos. You might have to click the More button to have it open up and show you all the links. And it's also available on my website at crappychildhoodfairy.com. Everything's there. If you sign up for that course, not only can you learn the techniques pretty quickly, but you'll be invited to come join me on live Zoom calls where we do the techniques together and I answer questions. So, there's a way for you to really master the techniques without spending a penny. And it's incredibly helpful at learning to re-regulate and bring those emotions back down. The daily practice techniques, which is a specific format for writing, followed by a simple meditation, it can help you process all the extra emotions and anxieties in your mind. With trauma, your mind is quite the generator. A lot of stuff can be generated without even new experiences setting them off. They can just come up from the past, or you can be reacting to the present. You have a place to express those stress thoughts and get them on paper and release them. Then when you talk to your partner, it can be much more productive and simple, and you're not sort of laying on them this big mess of what was in here. It's distilled down to what is something they can actually understand and respond to. So the sixth reason why abandonment can be so common for us is that once we've been abandoned as kids, it's hard to escape the pattern of emotional flashbacks. I mentioned them before, but when they are not understood and managed, these intense outbursts of emotion can go so far as to be abusive. It can be emotional abuse. It can even go to physical abuse. Probably not, but in relationships where there is physical abuse, it's often because of emotional flashbacks. When you're having one is when you're most vulnerable and liable to do things and say things that hurt other people and that are going to cause the end of the relationship. All right, number 7, it's something called abandonment melange. And this is a term coined by Pete Walker, who wrote the excellent book, CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. I encourage you to check it out. And abandonment melange is a toxic combination of terrible, terrible emotions, of grief and rage and terror. Have you ever had that when you've been left, or even when you fear that you've been left? This sick feeling creeps over you. You know it's bigger than what most people feel. And it's almost like a chemical poisoning. So the word for that is abandonment melange. It doesn't happen to everybody. It happens to people who have an abandonment wound because abandonment actually happened to them when they were kids. And if you have that, then I don't even need to tell you how toxic it is for relationships. It causes unreasonable perception and behavior and a sort of meltdown emotionally that doesn't feel like a safe or grounded person to anybody who's dating you. If you have this, I think you'll recognize what I'm talking about. So healing your abandonment melange begins just by knowing what it's called. And when you know what it's called, and then you actually notice when it's happening, you can go, oh, wait, hold on. This is abandonment melange. And my feelings are actually distorting my perception right now. And it's very comforting to know what this is, because if you're in abandonment melange, things are not as bad as you are perceiving them to be. What a relief. Then you can use your tools to re-regulate emotionally and come back to present time. Now, the 8th reason we get abandoned in relationships so often is we have trouble developing relationships in a conscious way. It's really hard when you have a big attachment wound to go slowly enough to get to know somebody properly so that you can find out, are there red flags here? Do they have strong feelings about me? Do I have strong feelings about them? This takes time to develop, and what happens with people with CPTSD is sometimes we have huge walls up. We can't go fast at all. We can't even go on a date, or we go on one date and we're already planning a trip to Vegas to go get married tomorrow. That's the nature of CPTSD, but there are workarounds that you can use even if your mind is still doing that. A part of you can still recognize that as a person with complex PTSD who tends to either put up walls or rush in or both, you can learn to handle all of this better with workarounds. So that's something I teach in my dating course and dating coaching program. Now the links to those are down below in the description section below all my videos too, and if you don't see them there, you can go to my website again, crappychildhoodfairy.com. This is why I teach people a structured approach to dating so that you can get around that impulsiveness of pushing people away or rushing in. All of this is happening because of emotional and neurological wounds that happen in the life of you as a child when you were abused or neglected. If that was you, I want you to give yourself just like a big hug of approval and validation that despite all that you've been through, you're trying to heal. You're here, you're watching this video, you're trying to learn to love other people in a healthy way, and nothing could be more beautiful and noble than that. And now that you're healing, your judgment's going to start healing. And when people say, oh, you're just trying to recreate your terrible childhood, you can take that into consideration and decide for yourself if it's true. And if it's not, you can say, thank you for your opinion, but no thanks. And if you care to, you can express yourself about how you see it, because how you see reality matters. It can be such a relief to get some insight about what goes on with CPTSD, how normal you are, how you're just a person having a normal reaction to some very abnormal circumstances. You can start to get free of that burden of shame and self-doubt around things like, why do I keep making these same mistakes? The answer is because you have CPTSD, and with CPTSD, it's normal. I have it. If you do too, I have great news. These are symptoms that you can work on and you can heal. If you want to find out more about the wounds of childhood trauma, you can take my quiz right over there, and I will see you very soon.